maybe we'll start down here first with Meg and just sort of go down the line and have each of them share a little bit about their backgrounds, because trust me, it's very impressive. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I am a professor at ORU. I'm working on my PhD in organizational leadership. I teach digital marketing. That's why I'm on this panel today. But I also have a business called The Faithful Leader. It's executive coaching and consulting. Just kidding.
I have my own microphone. Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Susan Ellerbach, and I am the executive editor of the Tulsa World. I've been at the World for more than 30 years. I started when I was 10. So I'm very happy to be here today. This is a topic that is very close to my heart, so I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rachel Anderson. My title is Campus Director for Green Heck Group, and I get a lot of the question, what the heck is Green Heck? It's a manufacturer that has been around since the 40s but is new to Tulsa, and so will hopefully be one of the largest employers in Tulsa in 5 or 10 years. And so part of that is we operate a little like a startup. So what do? I wear a lot of hats. But I've just been there since January. Previous to that, I worked at Schnocky Turnbow Frank, which is a PR and leadership development firm here in Tulsa.
Good afternoon, I'm Dick Pryor. I'm General Manager at KGOU Radio, your NPR source in Oklahoma City. We serve about 32 counties in Oklahoma, reach 1 million people. Before KGOU, I was at OETA for 25 years as Deputy Director, Managing Editor, Anchor, Host, and other things, reporter for a while as well. And part of my television career, besides the 25 years where you saw me on OETA here in Tulsa and across the state, 2.5 years back in the early 80s, I was a sports reporter and anchor at Channel 2.
Thank you so much. Let's give another round of applause for our panelists. So to kick things off, one of the questions that you had for your table discussions was around having previously been interviewed by the press. And I know just the concept of being interviewed on camera or for a news story of any kind tends to induce shivers for a lot of folks. All of our panelists have either interviewed folks or been interviewed themselves, or both in many cases. So I thought it would be fun to just sort of kick things off, and again, we can go in whatever order anybody wants to go, but just talk maybe briefly about the experience of having been interviewed and any insights you might have into how to make that better. So, want to start us, Meg?
All right. I haven't interviewed because I'm not in the press, but I have been interviewed for a couple of different social endeavors. And the first time, I don't know, I felt like hives were coming up my neck, and I was just really nervous, and I didn't know what to say. And then I feel like it was pretty much a failure. But the next time, I reached out to some of my press friends and was like, what do I do? And they said, remember 3 things. People can remember 3 things. Gave me some coaching, and I feel like it's getting better every time.
Do you want to share the 3 things quickly?
Oh, just to remember 3 points.
Oh, just 3 points
Yeah,
to share.
So whatever you're being interviewed about.
Whatever it is, perfect.
People can remember 3 things.
Perfect.
Well, I've been, like I said, in the journalism business for quite a long time, so I've done a lot of interviewing. But when the tables are turned, I can tell you, even the press gets a little bit nervous about being interviewed. The first time it happened to me was probably about 10 years ago. My daughter was a student at Oklahoma State University, and much to my chagrin, was diagnosed with meningitis. So that was a campus emergency, and the next thing I knew, the press was calling me. I was identified in the Oklahoman as she was my daughter. My husband was on the way to the hospital and heard our name on the radio station. So you become a little more sensitive about interviewing when you are the source or the interviewee. So I can tell you that luckily she's a wonderful person and has 2 beautiful granddaughters for me now, and everything turned out well, but it was kind of a life-changing experience for me.
Rachel?
So I've been on both sides as well. I started my career as a journalist, and I think moving over into the public relations and communications side, that was a big asset, knowing kind of where a journalist is coming from. And so I've done a lot of training and development in this area and coaching for those who would be likely to be interviewed at different companies. And so here are my tips. Are you ready? First one is take a breath. If somebody puts a microphone in your face, take a breath. If they call you and say, can we have an interview, just take a breath. The other one is take a minute and get your information. Have the information in front of you, gather, ask, what are we going to be talking about? Because I want to make sure that I have the right information or data and I'm providing you accurate information. Because a lot of us walk into those thinking this journalist is rooting for me to fail. They want to trip me up. They want to catch me off guard. They want to get juice or dirt or whatever. The opposite is true. They are looking for information. They want a good and accurate interview with you, and you are the expert. That's why they're calling you. And so when you approach it that way and know it's your knowledge that they need, I think that a lot of us would relax when we approach those interviews that way. My other piece of advice that I tell people a lot is that the only thing that you have control over, you can try to ask them to put the camera in a certain place, or are you gonna? Is this a full body shot? I know a lot of us would say, is it going to be a close up? What's that? You can't control the headline. You can't always control the questions. The only thing you can control, believe it or not, is the words that are coming out of your mouth. And then be truthful and don't speculate. So a lot of, and I think the journalists here would say the same thing, a question sometimes we ask because you are the expert and we want information is, what happened here today? Or why do you think that this happened? Or why do you think that or this? Or what's your opinion on that? And so the best rule there is only go with what you know and don't speculate.
That's all great. You're right. What Rachel said, remember that. Don't speculate. But I would take it one step further and say, know your message, speak your message, and know when to stop talking. And when it's time to stop talking, stop talking. And the other thing is, be sincere. Be sincere. We pick up on that. You may be saying something that's perfectly accurate and factual, but if you look like you're being a little bit smarmy, the camera picks that up and reporters pick that up. If you don't know how to be sincere, practice it. And if you have to, fake it. That's one of those TV tricks. We learn how to fake sincerity. So practice being sincere and be sincere. Speak from the heart, but again, know when to stop talking. And if you're going to be on TV, one other little tip, before you do the TV interview, don't eat salad.
Although salad before a panel discussion like this is perfectly fine. Rachel mentioned the concept of being truthful there. Just a question for the whole panel. Why does the truth matter? Thoughts on why the truth matters?
Well, I'll jump in there. The truth matters to us because it's the basis of our credibility. We go to great lengths to get the truth, to make sure that it's correct and accurate before we report it. Because every time you pick up something and you see a correction, you have a tendency to go, they couldn't get it right, and that's a hit at us, and we understand that. And in the environment that we live in now, it becomes even more important for media outlets to make sure that they're reporting accurate information. Sometimes the press is its own worst enemy. They've made a lot of mistakes, and we've taken a lot of hits, but I think if you stick to that very basic thing, to report the truth and verify, there's always that old adage in journalism that if your mother says she loves you, check it out. That's what we do. We look for truth and we verify it.
I think from a company standpoint, and you all are an organization focused on ethics. And so let's say in a scenario that there's a company that's messed up. We, as consumers of the media, are much more likely to forgive that company if they fess up and apologize than if they lie and keep lying and lie harder and harder and harder, and then we know the truth. It's very difficult to get over that. We feel betrayed. And so the truth from a reputation standpoint is really important. And I'm not an overly data-driven or statistical kind of, but I want to share this. So if you've never heard of the Edelman Trust Barometer, I would encourage you to look at that. It's really interesting information, Edelman Trust Barometer. It's an annual survey. Really what they're looking at is how much people trust different industries and areas, media, government, politicians, any of that sort of thing. And so U.S. trust among the general population plummeted more than it's ever done in a one-year span this past year. 43% of people generally trust one another in the general population. That means more than half of us are having conversations and assuming the other person is being distrustful. It also went down among believing government entities, and for the first time, the media is the least trusted institution globally. And I think that should really concern all of us. 63% of people don't know the difference between good journalism from fake news. That should also concern a lot of us. And I know we're going to talk more about, figuring out the difference between those two, but in my opinion, that's why the truth matters. We need to make sure, we need to check our facts as companies, but also as journalists. We need to make sure that the information that we're putting out there is truthful and accurate.
How can society function if we don't know the truth? If we're operating with a language that we cannot share? And I would urge people to seek the truth, not just journalists, which is what we do. Carl Bernstein from the Washington Post says, we seek the best obtainable version of the truth. That shifts over time. But I think if all of us as journalists and as citizens commit to seeking the truth, then we have that shared operating system, that shared language from which to work from.
Great. So I'm going to shift gears. Did you have something you wanted to add to that? Go ahead.
Just one thing, being in the PhD program, we're taught, transparency, and we're seeking the truth, we're seeking different research, we're seeking things at deeper levels, and it's such a responsibility. And I think all of us have that responsibility in this room and as citizens in this world to seek that truth and to also be transparent and open and have conversations with other people that invite in challenging our own biases and helping us to understand at a deeper level what we're truly seeking out, and then taking the steps like we'll talk about today to really make sure that's accurate, because at the end of the day, what we're posting, what we're saying, how we're behaving, it really impacts our world.
So that's a great pivot sort of to our next topic. We've been sort of touching on more traditional news or broadcast type media, but one of the discussion questions was around social media and the impact of that. So my question to the panel is, with the advent of social media and the speed of technology, that for some folks that is a news source, and sometimes it's questioned and sometimes it's not. What are some guideposts or some guidelines that maybe the panel can offer around the consumption, the navigation of social media in today's world? Anybody want to jump in on social?
Well, teaching digital marketing, I don't know if we're going into algorithms, but we all know that digital marketers are producing ads, and they are even on Facebook. What you click and what you read, you're going to get more of that. It's just part of the world that we're living in. And so what you also seek out or what you follow, unfollow, we're creating our own culture in that way. on social media. And I know a lot of people, even I know my generation, the generation coming up, that's all they look to. And so I know for me and for a lot of other people, we want to know, well, how do we know what media is, and how do we know what we should look at and what we shouldn't, and what's truthful and what's not? I mean, we have things like Snopes and some of those things, but I would love to hear from our media people what that looks like in the world today.
Well, I think, Dick, you have some great handouts that I think Shannon was going to send to this group about how to verify your media sources. And it's kind of what I talked about a little bit earlier when I talked about how we're trying to get at the truth. You know, there are steps that you need to take to verify the sources that you have. I have my brother-in-law lives in Iowa. He's a huge Hawkeye fan, and he sends me stuff all of the time. But everything that he sends me, I trust and verify, because I look at the sources that he's using, and to be honest, I'm a little bit horrified, you know, and I send him a message back, and I'll say, you do realize that I work in the media, that I went to journalism school, and that I check everything, and he checks nothing, and that's so frustrating to me. But Dick, do you want to share a little bit about, because they're great ideas.
Yeah, I've got about 8, and these are not mine, actually. I have another handout that is designed to help you determine a news source you can trust. But since we're talking about social media, these are from Carolyn Thompson of the Associated Press. And I'll say right up front, I think one of the things that is most important in social media is consider the source. Consider the source. Don't just look at the clickbait headline. Consider the source. What did she say? Look at the URL. Does it look odd? If it looks kind of odd, there's a lot of letters in it, it may be fake. Does it make you mad? Social media is often designed to make you mad, to have an emotional response. Are other news sites reporting it? If they aren't, it might be fake. How is the writing? Is there punctuation? Capitalization? That matters. Real journalists know that stuff. People that aren't journalists, not so much. Who are the writers and the people in the story? Are they identified? Are photographs identified? If you're seeing something on Facebook, don't just assume that that picture has not been photoshopped. Who are those people? Where did that happen? When did that happen? Ask those questions. What are Snopes and other fact-checking sites saying? And remember this, it might be satire. It might be The Onion. That's why you have to consider the source. And one other thing, think twice before sharing. The internet is forever.
So what about advice in terms of that for parents out there? Because a lot of what you just said is certainly applicable for individual consumption. What about for parents who are trying to monitor, especially their children's activity, and how to guide that?
Yeah. I'll just tell a story, sat on a panel a couple of times for parents on social media and technology. A lot of the times young people have multiple accounts, so it is hard to manage that. They'll have an account for their family, and they will have an account for other things. It's really easy to set up a password for you to download any kind of app. You have the password, they don't have the password to the phone. So that's something really easy that you can do. But the other thing that we've talked about a lot, and I work with people on personal branding and reputation management sometimes, but that's to think about as adults what you're posting about your children online and how that's going to affect them in the future. So for example, whenever the internet came out, even the Facebook, I was, I think, a junior in college, whenever that happened, and we didn't even know what to do with this thing. We were like, and some of the posts that come back are, Megan is going to school. There was no tell you the opinion, there was no videos, there was no photos that you could post. And as it's grown and social media is kind of like blown up, everyone's trying to figure out how to deal with it, and we're not teaching enough how that can impact you in the future. So for example, we were with a 6th grade class one time, and we had them Google themselves in an incognito browser. And an incognito browser is one that can't be tracked, no cookies, nothing like that. And there was a girl in the class, and she started freaking out, started crying. She couldn't believe what was on the internet about her because her mom had posted all these videos of her having fits. I mean, and I know all of us in this room, who wants your childhood plastered all over Facebook? I mean, I know I'm very good with the old-time photo books that are at my parents' house, but I know that that's the case a lot of the times, and there are sites that can help you look at what you're posting online, but it is really good to think about that because it can follow them, and online bullying is a real thing, and people will look for that. College admissions, future employers, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about that, but it does affect your future and impact that in positive and negative ways. And the reason why we were doing this with a class, and we've done, because I have another company where we have social and emotional learning curriculum for middle school and high school students, and it was to get them thinking about, from a no judgment standpoint, but what are you posting online and how can it help you or hold you back from reaching your goals?
So that's a good segue, and this may be one for you, Rachel, but sort of from a corporate standpoint, what advice might you share for all of us, if we're working and representing an organization, the way we interact socially can reflect on us, can also reflect on that organization. Do you have ideas or guidelines on how to navigate that best?
I think this could be an hour presentation itself, right? Just so I know my audience, how many of you love social media? Raise your hands. Don't be shy. We're all on it. Come on, raise your hands. How many of you hate social media? How many have a love-hate relationship with? Okay, that's the majority of us, right? That is the majority. How many of you, do we have any HR folks in the room? Yep. Anybody who's like general counsel for your company? These are the things that keep us up at night, is our employee going rogue and posting crazy stuff about our company, right? And so what do you do?
By the way, we love those posts.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
See?
Yeah.
And they're looking for that.
Yes.
They're looking for that. So I'll try to keep it as short and sweet as possible. Have a social media policy, okay? But know that probably there are a lot of holes that could be shot into that policy. But have one in place, communicate it to your employees. You are not a representative of the company, you're not speaking on behalf of the company, but you are an ambassador for the company. What's good language, bad language, that whole bullying thing. If you're going to harass someone on social media, that's like harassing them on the job. So we can fire you for that. So there are some different things that you can have in your policy. And reinforcing that. In a time of crisis, a lot of times we remember we've got to write some message points for the media. We've got to communicate with our customers. Employees are sometimes the group that gets forgotten, but they can be spreading good information on your behalf, and so making sure that your employees have good information to share. A lot of companies have social media. You can get points or you can earn rewards or whatever if you are part of a social media group for the company where you're talking about good things and helping recruit other good people to work there. So there's a lot of things going on. But just up and firing someone because they say, my manager is horrible, or this company has some unethical business practices going on, I would hesitate to just fire them for that. There are some cases right now that are going pretty high up in the courts to figure out what to do with them because you're messing with two different things. One is freedom of speech, and we all know that with social media in itself is getting really complicated. The other thing is the National Labor Relations Act. So when I can lean on that, basically is if my manager is a horrible person, and there are other people there who think my manager is a horrible person, then I have a right to say, even on social media, that my manager is a horrible person. Is that professional? Probably not. That's why this could be an hour conversation. But be aware of the laws. Look and see if you have a social media policy, and don't write it once and then forget it, because if you wrote it 10 years ago, it's just null and void. It doesn't even make sense anymore. And then make sure that your employees have good information, because they are going to talk about what it's like to work for you.
Yeah. Any other thoughts related to that? So we touched on this a minute ago, but it probably deserves a little bit of a deeper dive. Given the amount of news that's out there, the amount of news sources, both reputable and perhaps otherwise, let's talk a little bit more about specifically and sort of tactically how to make the best of that situation, to avoid information overload, but to make sure the information you're consuming is beneficial and helpful. Thoughts?
Well, the first thing that I always tell people is to have multiple sources of information, or look at multiple sources of media. You know, the ones that you trust, the ones that you're familiar with, and then maybe, you know, check out one that you've heard about that, you know, somebody else might recommend to you, and read to see what they're talking about. I think that in today's environment, that's just about the only way that you can get, you know, fully informed about what's going on. You know, of course, I'll be more than happy to take your subscription to the Tulsa World. I'll be standing at the doorway in the back. But, you know, but we're not the only source in town. We have a lot of good media sources in Tulsa. We have a lot of good media sources nationally. I always think that you need to pay attention to the news sources that maybe don't agree with you. In my household, we kind of have what I call a mixed marriage. You know, one of us watches CNN, one of us watches Fox, and then we switch. So we have a pretty spirited debate. But I think that's healthy. I think that's healthy for all of us. So I would just urge you to look at various sources that you trust, that, you know, you've taken some of those things that Dick, you know, talked about earlier. You've verified your sources. Now see how they're presenting the news. You know, look for loaded language. Are they using adjectives that maybe don't reflect what the story should be? You know, pay attention to the way the stories are being written, because only you can really decide what's the best news source for you. You know, the days when we all turned on CBS and listened to Walter Cronkite, well, okay, some of us did, but, you know, those days are over. So I would encourage you to you know, kind of search out your own media sources.
I think my advice would be, as a consumer of media, if you agree with the media that you are reading or watching all of the time, you're doing it wrong. You should question things. You should disagree with especially the editorial and the opinion sections and things like that. I think it stretches us. It makes us smarter. And so when I went through Leadership Tulsa, I'm sure a lot of people in this room went through that program, and Wendy, the leader of that program, said something to me, or said something to the whole class in the beginning. I should probably tell her I passed this around since 2012. She said, when you disagree with someone, listen harder. That's been a game changer for me, because when I used to disagree with someone, I would come up with the 10 rebuttal points of why they were wrong in my head and stop listening while I was gathering all that information to argue with them. I think it's really stretched me, and it doesn't mean I'm going to walk away and agree with them or with the media story or the news outlet that I'm consuming. But I believe that really, to be responsible consumers of media, we have to look outside those that we're comfortable with and used to. And that includes social. If you see it on social, please click through and go to the actual news outlet and read past the headline.
And when you go to the news outlet,
Yes.
take a look at their history. Who are they? Who funds them? Have they been around a while? Do they actually have an address? A lot of news sites, or sites that might look like a news site, really aren't news sites at all. Are they advocacy sites? Are they just sites that popped up because somebody wanted something to do? Legacy, traditional news organizations tend to get it right, tend to abide by a code of ethics. What does a news organization do when they get facts wrong? That's a tell on whether they're a real news organization or not. So investigate further. What you've just heard, I can't emphasize that anymore. You've got to be involved. As a news consumer, we need everyone to be involved in looking at the sites critically, taking into account other points of view. And this is hard, but try to do this. Try to determine when it's opinion and when it's news. I think that's a real problem for a lot of people today. They can't tell the difference.
So that's a great segue as well. Phrases come into the lexicon periodically. One that has come in recently is fake news, right? We've all heard that phrase used a lot. For the panelists, from your perspectives, what is fake news and why is that concept important to understand? Want to kick us off?
Well, interesting. Fake news. The way it's used these days, it reminds me a little bit of law school. And so I was on the trial team in law school at the University of Oklahoma. And so we were practicing a courtroom scene and doing the cross-examination and objections and all of that. And one of the lawyers on the other side objected to a question that I had asked. And the judge said, "And what are the grounds for your objection?" And leading would be one, asked and answered would be one. There's a whole litany of responses that would be appropriate. But this young lawyer did not really know, but he did let us know what he was thinking when he objected to what I asked. He said, "damaging." Well, that's not really an objection. But he didn't want me to ask that question because it was damaging his case. And I think really and truly, if you boil it down to it, what is fake news? Fake news has just become a slogan to throw out there. If it doesn't fit my point of view, if it doesn't fit my meme, if it doesn't make me look good, I'm just going to call it fake. But is it really fake? Maybe not.
How damaging do you think that has been to the whole enterprise of either reporting or just sharing, sharing perspectives, sharing truths? How difficult has that made the current landscape?
Well, Rachel, your numbers pointed
I mean,
out.
it was that trust barometer. I mean, we saw the biggest drop in trusting just each other. But all of that goes from and stems from that distrust of media, of government, of business, of all those different things. And so I think it's had a direct correlation. I know it has. And I think Dick is exactly right. It's most of the time it's news that we disagree with that we would call fake news, or we just can't believe that we would call fake news. And so I think it's funny. It's a conversation that's hard for people to have because it can be very politically driven. Because we have an individual who kind of coined the term, but it's become just mainstream and we're all using it. And even from a funny point of view, right? When somebody says something you disagree with, fake news, and it's like a joke in the office. But I think that it's important when you are consuming news and following all of these kind of guidelines and ethical points of view and researching what you're looking at, when you can discern the difference. And when people are using that phrase, I think it's important to all of us to remind others how important it is, the job of the media. And that if we distrust the media, where will we get the information? Journalists go to school, and I went to journalism school. You are taught to seek the truth, to report the truth, to be the watchdogs for society, to be the watchdogs for you all. And what I mean by that is to make sure people are behaving ethically, and when they're not, to let you know.
Susan, did you have thoughts on sort of when that fake news term is lobbed in the journalist direction?
You mean when did it start being logged?
No, just what the
Because I
impact,
think we could
what
all
the
point
impact
to
of
that.
that has been. What the impact of that has been, and how that gets,
Yeah.
how you effectively rebut
Yeah.
that.
Well, it's a very difficult conversation like you had because it becomes a political conversation. And I don't believe it's a political conversation. It's exactly what Rachel and Dick were talking about. Fake news is not news that you don't agree with. I mean, that's not the definition of fake news. Fake news is inaccurate news. It's not based on fact. That's my bread and butter. It is news based on fact. We have somebody else who's in charge of the opinion page. We don't write opinions in our paper. We do take phone calls when people think that we have used what I call loaded language and that maybe we've slanted an article. That's not acceptable in our newsroom. And a lot of people don't understand that. I get phone calls, constantly. They'll say, well, you use this phrase, or the reporter used this phrase. And you know what? Sometimes they're right. Sometimes our editors missed it and we've made a mistake. And that's on us, because we're in an environment right now that we have to be extremely careful, because we have to maintain our credibility for the reasons that Rachel was talking about. I get on my soapbox, so please forgive me about this. But we are kind of, the watchdog for the, but we also do fun things. We tell you where to go to dinner. We tell you what the 5-star restaurants are in Tulsa. We tell you, what movies are great, or, what your neighbor's kid did at the state wrestling tournament. Those are things that it makes us a community. So your media source can be your community. But there is that watchdog. If the press doesn't do it, if you don't trust the press to do that, then what becomes of our community? And I'm talking about at the local level. It's your school board, what's happening in your court system, just all phases of our community. So that's what concerns me, that people, when they get frustrated, they just throw out that term. And it's damaging, as you can see by the numbers, and those are scary numbers.
So in an effort to combat that and sort of hopefully reinstill trust, what thoughts do any of you have regarding ways to encourage much more civil or diplomatic dialogue? In other words, to combat the fake news phenomenon. Thoughts on the best ways to do that?
Well, one of the things that we've done is we've tried to become more transparent as an organization. You see more of our editors writing pieces, talking about the decisions that we make on what things that we think about our industry. We talk about a little bit more about who our people are. It always surprises people when, I'm standing next to somebody on, at the soccer field, and they say, what do you do for a living? And I say, I work at the Tulsa World. And they go, oh, you work at the Tulsa World, but journalists are your neighbors. I mean, they go to dinner with you. They go to church with you. They go to the soccer fields with you. They, at the movie sitting next to you. They think about journalists kind of in the, that they don't recognize them. So we're trying to put a face on the fact that we're earning a living reporting the news, just like you're earning a living at your in the courthouse or something like that. So that's what we have tried to do. We take a lot more phone calls, and we respond to people, on phone calls, on emails, by letters. I think journalists have become more responsive because, you might call it customer service. We have to do that. We need to do that. We should do that.
Susan, that's a great point. The idea that we need to do a better job explaining what we do, how we do it, why we're important. But I would also like to throw that back at the news consumer. I think it's also the consumer's responsibility to ask questions. And sometimes we get questions we don't really want to have to answer. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. Ask questions. If you don't like something, give us a call. If you want to know about what we do, give us a call. Read about journalism. Find out what we do. We have a lot of pressures that influence how we operate. Staffing, declining listenership, readership, whatever it may be. There are a lot of financial pressures. After all, we're still in a business, and we have to operate within that business structure. But we're doing the best we can with what we have at any given time, and just because we might make a mistake here or there doesn't mean we're bad, doesn't mean we're biased. And I will say one other thing, and this is what prompted me to think about, people need to know more about what we do. This last week, just 3 days ago, I got a call from a person who was listening to our station and said, well, I just want to complain about media bias because you used a phrase that, I think you should use a different phrase. And I said, well, why do you think that? He said, well, I want you to use this phrase. And I explained to him that we use the Associated Press Style Handbook, which is the guidebook for journalists, that in certain situations you use certain words, and that's the accepted standard. And we're adhering to the standard. And so he went from being upset and thinking we were biased to, oh, now I understand. Okay, thanks. And it was just that simple. Makes a difference.
I think third-party endorsement is key here. So what I mean by that is the media folks can tell you to trust them and to read more news. But I think it means more coming from someone who is non-media to be that advocate and to talk about the importance of what a journalist does. So did anybody watch the Super Bowl? Worst Super Bowl ever. But there were a couple of good commercials. And one of them, I think it was the Washington Post. And I just remember being moved because I'm kind of a nerd that way. But I loved it. But how much more effective would it have been if that commercial talking about the importance of community and news reporting and coverage and all those sorts of things, what if that message hadn't come from the Washington Post? What if it had come from one of the companies that's on that Edelman really high, that trust barometer, like Apple or Google? What if they had paid the whatever bajillion dollars to run something about how awesome news media is? Probably would have been more effective, right? And so I think as news consumers, those of us who appreciate it, and we get sad when we hear that our local newsroom has layoffs, and we know that that's a big impact, and we don't want to see that happen, we have to subscribe. We have to tell our friends, to subscribe, to read, to listen, to learn more. And when they start talking about fake news, it is, well, tell me why you think that. Let's have a conversation about that. I think if more of us were willing to have real conversations with people and not get offended and not make them political. Not everything has to be political. I think if we were able to have those tougher conversations with people, things like fake news would start to subside.
Great, thank you. I'm going to sort of wrap us up here, but before I do, so we've all talked today about, seeking the news, trying to be good citizens and consumers of the news, how to avoid confirmation bias and things of that nature. Sort of go down the row here, if you had to share one key takeaway in terms of encouraging good sort of news consumption, best practices in a way to help be a good citizen, what would that one recommendation be?
Well, I'll come from the social media side of things, and this might not be from consuming the news, but tagging along on what we were just talking about. I mean, from a social scientist and training perspective, I would look at feeds and on posts, and there's a lot of mean people. They're just like saying a lot of things, and not even just like a reaction, not even a response. And it's shaping our culture, and it's shaping our world. And I think that as leaders, we have a responsibility to change that. So if you can have those conversations or inject something that's positive, or maybe just talk with people about whenever they do post, and just really, it's like the goal of tearing people down. And are we going to combat what's negative in our world with positive at times? I mean, we can have positive news. And so I think that's great. And then just taking all the advice that you heard today and continuing to seek that out. But it goes into having conversations in real life too. And we can be so quick to judge and have opinions online, but are we really seeking out people who are different than us and having those conversations?
Thank you. Susan?
Well, I think that, we've covered a lot of what I would emphasize. I think Rachel put it pretty well when she said that if you disagree with someone, listen to them. Listen a little harder. If you doubt something in print or in broadcast, send them an email, give us a call, write a letter. I mean, because in this environment, we pay a lot of attention to that. Our world is changing, and the media has to change with it a little bit. We have to be more consumer oriented. We have to understand what you think. Not that we're going to report it the way that you want us to do it, because our business is the truth and accuracy. But you need to hold us accountable. If you think we haven't done a good job, let us know. It's a two-way conversation.
Thank you, Rachel.
Asking me to say one important thing is like, have you been listening to me at all? It's really hard for me to narrow down. I think I will say one really important thing to do to be a good and informed citizen is to never stop learning. Never assume you know it all, and never assume if you don't agree with it, it's wrong. So I would say never stop learning.
That's awesome. I will say this. I recommend dialing down the judging and practice something. When you have a conversation with your friends and family, when you're sitting around the table at Thanksgiving or Christmas or some occasion, talk about politics and religion. Oh, wait, you can't talk about politics and religion, right? Why can't we? You mean with our friends and family, we can't talk about important topics? I think politics and religion might be pretty important in our lives, but we can't talk about it because we don't practice how to do it well. So I encourage everyone to practice how to have those civil conversations, even about difficult topics, especially difficult topics. We'll all be better for it.
Thank you so much. Let's have another round of applause for our panelists. Shannon?
Well, I think this was very, very enlightening. So I appreciate, because they all work so hard to prepare and research, and the conversations in preparing for these panels and is not always, you don't just stick people up here and say, well, go ahead. I think it was very informative and appreciative. I think what I would like to do is when I send the emails to you with the information that Dick has prepared, we might include the Edelman barometer, so maybe a link to that. If you could send that to me, I think that's interesting. And it's scary because business, the currency of business is trust. And every year it goes down. So what do you do when you can't trust one another in commerce, in relationships? So hopefully we can turn things around by being better informed. I have two quick announcements. First of all, that basket with the black cloth, that was your dessert. So if somebody is hogging it, make them give you a cookie. Or the brownies, I've had 2 brownies. They're really good. So the second is we will be back here next month, so don't get confused. They've treated us extremely well here. And Ryan, thank you so much for the accommodations. This is fabulous. You're spoiling us. It saves us a lot of money. So, and then the third thing, if you're here to get your CPE, be sure you pick it up before you leave. And we will see you next month for Unity in the Community. I appreciate it.